Right, a massive welcome for the first time to Thomas Sheridan with History, Heretics and Hysteria. Thomas is an artist, researcher, public speaker and author of 4 books. His insightful website is all the W's, thomassheridanarts.com. Thomas highlights tonight good and evil. And we all know what those are, don't we? We're all clear on them. They need no explanation. No one else has had a hand in shaping our thoughts and feelings on these. We learnt these when we were young, maybe. But what if? Please welcome Thomas Sheridan.
Thank you, Rob, and thanks everybody for having me here. My name is Thomas Sheridan, and the world never made sense to me growing up. I couldn't understand why there was so many suffering in the world. Most people I met were normal, cordial, decent, well-behaved, and yet that did not reflect the reality of the world that was filled with wars, economic chaos, social, religious sectarianism, and other forms of human deprivation that seemed so unnecessary. I grew up on the north side of Dublin during the Troubles, and when I was 8 years old, 3 car bombs went off in the centre of Dublin, killing 30 people quite close to where I was, and it was the moment in my life where I became conscious. I was suddenly aware that I was a being, a living being at 8 years old, going on 9. And I couldn't understand why someone would do something like that. So anyway, I went through life, I played in bands, I ended up in New York, playing in a rock band, having an amazing time, and when that finished, I went to work on Wall Street after I trained to be a graphic designer, and I worked mostly in Wall Street investment banks, including Goldman Sachs. And then suddenly the world started to make sense to me, because I was starting to encounter and meet people that seemed to have a very different value construct than the rest of us. They were very glib and they were very superficial. And through a series of happenstances, I encountered this one guy who one day explained to me that he'd been clinically diagnosed as a socially functioning psychopath. And I thought that was, Norman Bates' axe killer. And he says, no, it's not. It's just somebody who doesn't care about anything. And they see everybody and everything as an object and a target. And he was very candid about this. And he'd been clinically diagnosed following some events in his life that his parents forced him. He came from a rich family, so instead of going to jail, in America, no rich people don't go to jail, only poor people do. So he got some kind of diagnostic testing, and he scored the highest level of this thing called the psychopathy scale, which basically meant he was a psychopath. What a psychopath is someone who has no conscience. They only see other people as objects. They have no remorse, and they see everything in life as a target or something to be used. That's it. It's a different way of living. Now, what I'm going to give to you tonight is an enormous subject. In fact, I would actually go as far and be bold to say that this is the subject. This is it. This is why we are seeking answers. It's because 1% of the population, and probably around 4% in the upper echelons of society, could be clinically diagnosed as psychopaths. And they're making it hell for the rest of the human race. And you have met them in your own life. If you're up to 30 years of age, you've definitely met one through your job or somewhere. You've encountered one. However, this is not a night about fear. This is a toolkit I'm presenting here. So we must have maturity. And this is why I put this slide next. Hellraiser, the movie Hellraiser, the Clive Barker film from the 1980s. And this is what we're going to do tonight. We're actually going to raise hell, bring it out of the shadow, bring it into the real world. And just like this film, that cube, it's opened by desire and not curiosity. And it's the desire that actually can cause how you react to something in a negative or a positive way. So What I'm going to say to you is what I'm going to hear tonight is going to frighten some of you. It's going to make you wonder if you are one. And if you wonder if you're one, the chances are you're not. Because they don't self-reflect. It's like a robot. You're going to have recollections of people you met in your life, and it will suddenly go, that's what was going on. However, this is information that I believe everyone should be aware of, but nobody should dive into too deeply. It's not for everyone to go too deeply into it. Some people, they run away with themselves and they start thinking that everyone who annoys them in their lives or gives them a hard time becomes a psychopath. These people are unhealthy, so they're not even, actually I'm very suspicious of people who are very quick to call everyone a psychopath, because they're either deflecting from themselves or they're hysterics. So remember, it's 1% of the population and they're not violent. But knowing this information can fill in very strange periods in your life where someone may have damaged you, a bully at work, or a bad relationship, or a crazy boss. Now, why am I interested in this? Well, because it helped me when I met this guy, I started to investigate this stuff. There was very little books around at the time, but I picked up bits and pieces here from medical journals, and it became kind of like a train spotter thing for me, because it was like anytime I heard anything in the New York Times about studies of the psychopathology, I would read through it and look through it, and it was very interesting. It just was so interesting to me. But also I couldn't understand how we didn't know about this. Why this was such a big deal, and yet we were never being told about it. And the reason it became self-evident is because our system is built on psychopathology. Now, why do we go into these things? This is like, well, I'm not one of these spiritual dudes who he thinks everything is going to be great and okay. I'm not saying that stuff isn't real, but the world is made up of black, white, good, evil, positive, negative, male, female. We live in a dualist universe, and we have to accept that there's a darkness in this world. There's a darkness in the human condition, and there's a darkness, a shadow in there. And by bringing that shadow to the surface, as Carl Jung said, we become enlightened. One does not become enlightened by imagining figures of light, but by making the darkness conscious. This is self-reflection.
So
this
we bring
is
the darkness, the shadow of mankind into the light, and therefore we understand who we are as a species, what we're subjected to, and things in our own lives we become aware of. We are able to scale them up to the big picture. If we know why a period in our life was a mess, or someone we encountered really damaged us, it allows us to scale the experience up to the top. I believe that the psychopathology issue is the one that we can use the most to sell the idea that this world is dysfunctional and run by maniacs to the major public. They're never going to believe in lizards. They're never going to believe in aliens. They're never going to believe in anything like that. But you can use their own science against them. You have something very powerful that they cannot deny. And that they will have to confront and deal with. Because this is all scientifically validated. Now, I'm not saying there isn't a spiritual aspect to this. In fact, there is on some levels. Depending what your idea of spirituality is, where it is, how human consciousness interacts with reality and so on. And all this stuff is valid in this stuff as well. This is such a huge thing. I've done 3 talks in Norway. They were 3 hours each. I've done 9 hours and I still haven't covered probably half of what this subject takes. It's huge. I had a hard time tonight trying to keep this under 100 slides. I'm going to explain what the psychopath is, how it functions, how it's spotted. That doesn't mean we go around going, oh, he's wrong. You don't do that. Because that's how witch hunts start, and that's what they use to get against us. They want us fighting amongst each other and being suspicious. And then I'm going to scale it up to the greater level, the political, social, economic, and even spiritual level. I'm actually going to look through the history, hopefully we'll have time tonight, of evil, of good and evil, and where these ideas came from, and how we've been actually manipulated through such ideas. Okay, your grandmother used to say to you, oh, there's some good in every person. No, that's wrong. Psychopaths have no good in them. If they have good, it's just to manipulate and use people. It's a game they're playing. They don't have any good in them. They see everybody as a target and everybody as an object spoon, coat, CD player, wife. Bread, cheese, table, children. Human beings are just objects to them. Devices they can use. So they have no good in them. They're habitually predatorial and only view other people, families and organisations as objects for their own personal ends. They will undertake whatever forms of deception which may be required to achieve their aims, regardless of the consequences of others. They do not care about what happens to other people. Everything and everyone is a potential target to be manipulated and worked. Now, before we go further, this is not a witch hunt. I'm just giving you a toolkit, something you can actually go with. It doesn't mean we're going to start going around and looking for them and burning them and stuff like that, because that's what they would want. We're going to be much smarter than them. We're going to avoid them. I'm going to teach you how to do that. So this is awareness and self-defense. Now, before, again, we have to be mature. There's a lot of hysterical types have suddenly got into this stuff, and they start seeing psychopaths everywhere, just like, you know, a plague-ravaged serf back in the Middle Ages saw witches everywhere. Stay away from these people. They're idiots. They're dangerous idiots. We must be mature. We must be adult about this. Most times, a creep is just a creep. We've all been obnoxious or bad at some point in our lives. We've all done things we're ashamed of. But the difference between a normal person, us and a psychopath, is we actually look back and say, I shouldn't have done that. You feel bad about it. Or you didn't deliberately do it, you didn't target that person deliberately. It may have been a result of immaturity, selfishness, your libido. It may have been a thing of peer pressure. It may have been a witch hunt. But you look back, you know, gang mobbing in a job where they all picked on someone, and years later you look back and say, well, we shouldn't have picked on that woman, she did nothing wrong, I was just going along with peer pressure. A psychopath wouldn't care, and they would live their whole lives like that. They would live their whole lives, everything is a target, everything is to be something to be used and manipulated. They would never have any self-reflection, no guilt, no nothing, no remorse. So a psychopath's a very specific individual. Their machinations are driven by the desire to control the perceptions. This is a term I'm going to be using a lot tonight, perceptions. The perceptions of others, in order to the targets to hand over their personal sovereignty and then teach the targets to destroy, deconstruct themselves from within. How familiar does that sound in the world that we live in? We are not a species we're a species who are demolishing ourselves from within, according to mandates, concepts, ideas, dogmas, methods and systems that have been handed to us. Here, destroy yourself. Here, punish yourself. They've made our psychology that of a flagellant in the Middle Ages whipping themselves in order to get into heaven. Our minds are now like this. When you watch the news, you're told what to think. You're told how to hate yourself, because they're controlling what I call them the lords of perceptions. They're controlling our perceptions by telling you how to feel about yourself as a human being. And that's why it's so difficult to wake other people up. Now, what is a psychopath? What's the clinical definition? Well, Herbie Cleckley, who wrote the classic book, the first one I ever read, The Mask of Sanity, back in 1947, he was a psychiatrist. He said, it's a perfect mimic of a normally functioning person, able to mask or disguise the fundamental lack of internal personality structure and internal chaos that results in repeatedly purposeful, destructive behaviour. In other words, they invent personalities, they invent personas, they pretend to be somebody they're not in order to win your trust. Doesn't that sound like what you hear every time an election happens? And they're purposely destructible. They know exactly what they're doing. It's not an accident. It's not something that happens because they made a mistake. It happens because they did it deliberately. This internal chaos is then projected onto others at the social personal level in order to control their perceptions and thus create false realities within victims so as to manipulate them through dependency, confusion and fear. In other words, creating their order out of our chaos. You heard that one before? They cause chaos. They're merchants of nonsense. In the workplace, in the governments, they create nonsense, they create confusion. And what that does is, in that confusion, you're so willing to find an answer. Just give me some peace, tell me what tax I have to pay. Tell me what who I have to hate. Who do I vote for? Just give me some peace. Now, you're going to start thinking back at people you may have met in your life. Do not be diagnosing people just because you don't like them. Just think carefully. Be mature. The reveal is the point where you will know somebody who's probably a psychopath and they appear and you don't know where this new stranger came from. If you experience one of the following behaviours, there's 4 of them, not just these 2, and you have that all these things. You can't just do it on one thing. Invented personas to manipulate others. They'll invent a different personality for every person and place they interact with. They can leave one relationship and then you'll see them a few months later and they'll look like a different person. They'll have completely different interests and hobbies because they're manipulating the new person. Same with politicians. Invented personas. They change political parties across the time. In parliamentary democracies, you have crossing the floor. They give up on Labour and they go to Conservative. Vice versa. They're just cold-blooded, calculating business minds that are only interested in doing what it takes to get it. They pretend they're religious, they pretend they're pious. Oh, the New Age movement is filled with them. I'm so spiritual. Stab you in the back with a crystal. I've got a better term for them. Highly unreliable, broken promises. Psychopaths will make the most incredibly ambitious plans, including you as their right-hand man or woman, then on a whim, instantly discard those plans and move on some other crusade that excludes you. Targets often alter their own life plans to help the psychopath reach their imaginary goals, resulting in appalling financial, psychological, and financial chaos for the targets when the psychopath moves on. You are used like an object. The politician, when he will use people to get elected, as soon as he's elected, you don't matter. Vince Foster, he was an aide to Bill and Hillary Clinton. Literally within hours of the Clintons being elected, he was found dead in a park in Washington, D.C. with a suicide note saying that politicians can't be trusted. As soon as they get into power, they change to different people. Bill and Hillary. I don't know about Bill, but Hillary Clinton is an absolute. And that's what happened. She had no use for him anymore. He was disposable. And he killed himself. And they love when you kill yourself. That's what they're looking for. That's how they kill mostly. It's called murder by suicide. This idealization followed by cold rejection. At the height of the idealization, psychopaths always idealize, oh, you must be beautiful in the world. Oh, you're such a sexy guy. Oh, you're the best guitar player in the world. Oh, you're a brilliant artist. And as soon as it's no use to you anymore, you've gone. So the psychopath will show you obsessive love, care, and attention. However, once they feel where they have you or where they want you, or the relationship is ended, if you collapse in front of them on the street, they would simply step over you as if you never existed and continue on their way. Then they implement smear campaigns. So you look at the media, that's all the media is, smear campaigns. They attack people, and the smear campaign is designed to take your eye off the real ball. When psychopaths run a smear campaign, what they are doing is they're taking the deflection away from themselves. And it's happening right now in this country with all these old TV stars that are all being arrested. The reason for that is they're hoping the public will forget about the politicians who did much worse. That's what they're doing with that thing. It's a psychopathic smear campaign. I'm not saying those fellas are innocent, by the way. I'm just saying they're whipping up the hype through their trash media to get people all worried about, washed up stars from the 70s, so they're not looking at the ones who are currently in government. Becomes obsessed with a hobby-caused individual that's only doing this for show. And then loses interest instantly because it's just an interest to get. They want to target a woman who has a load of money, and she may be a born-again Christian, he'll pretend to be a born-again Christian. It's just a persona. It's just an act. Phony altruism. They pretend to be great charity workers, but it's to buy you. It's to buy your trust. This is why they have all these crazies at the top. All have these philanthropist organizations. Oh, they're great with the charity. Am I wonderful? I'm giving money to vaccines to Africa while I'm paying for bombs to be dropped on top of Afghanistan. Phony altruism. I surround myself with Bono and Bruce Springsteen and all these other gobshites. And they all, it doesn't mean I'm wonderful. And that's how they act as well. Even on the small, they'll be the one in the Catholic Church who will put the most money in. And make sure everyone sees them putting the money into the collection too. There's nothing real behind the persona. There's nothing. For my second book, To Be the Demons, I interviewed two psychopaths on Skype. And they both told me the same thing, and I've been confirmed from other things. They said they feel nothing inside themselves. They feel like they're a hollow shell. When they hear people talking about inner feelings or spiritual depth, they're like, what the hell is that? They don't get it. There's nothing in there. Everything about them is a robot. Okay, the history of psychopathology in the modern age. How it manifests in our society. Again, I'm sorry I'm flying through these slides here, but I've got a couple of books that go very deep into this, though, but I'm just trying to get my best out there for the time we have. Confusion. Everyone's confused today. You know, we're told to, you know, we have to cut back on our carbon footprint, but the cars they sell us are bigger and bigger. Everything is a distortion. This is called crazy making. Bigotry. I don't like you because you're this race. I don't like you because you're this class. I'm different than you because you're Labour, I'm Conservative. Everything. Divide and conquer. And they'll do it locally as well. Ignorance. Keeping people ignorant, trapping them in a world of ignorance so they never expand their consciousness and fulfill their potential as human beings. They don't want that. Mass media stereotypes. This is how psychopaths are portrayed within the mass media. They're cartoon characters. They're axe murderers. They're the Joker from Batman. They're, you know, all these kinds of, like Jason from Friday the 13th with his hockey mask. Because they don't want you thinking it's the guy who actually runs the accountant office down the road, or the woman who does the flowers at the church, or it's the guy who's running for, you know, the local MEP, whatever. Because that's where they really are. That's what they really look like. Glamorization. They glamorize the psychopath too as well. The glamorization of the psychopath through like films like American Psycho. You know, the guy is almost cool because he's a psycho. So is the Joker from Batman. So is James Bond. James Bond is a psychopath. You think about that. James Bond is a cold-blooded killer. He uses women as objects, and he disposes of them. He's no use for them anymore. And he has no remorse. He's a glamorized psychopath. We'll be talking about 007 later on. Power structures, again, they tell us that everything is for our good, even when it's crushing us and destroying us. It's like Orwell said, you know, the history of the world, the future is a boot stamping on a human face for all eternity. And they tell us that that's great, because it's normal. Relationships, that's how they often encounter them. They're very good, they're very ardent students of human behavior. And they know how to develop, use, manipulate relationships with people. Because if you have no emotional depth, and you have no internal feelings, what are you going to be really good at? Reading people. Reading them like studying them. And the social impact as well. No one really knows how bad this is. I would wager this is the issue. I would say if there was no psychopaths in the world, we'd probably we wouldn't live in a paradise, but we'd definitely live in a lot more peaceful world with a lot more economic stability and excessive materialism. That's another result of it. They're often, you know, the whole psychopathic system is to tell us to forget about ourselves as sovereign spiritual beings and only assign a meaning to our lives and set in terms of materialism. And then you have the inaccuracy of psychopathic archetypes as portrayed in the media. Cartoon-like baddies, which resemble, you know, nothing akin to real-life predators. You will never marry or work alongside or vote for the Joker from Batman. They never want you to think it's a regular person, someone that looks like a regular person. Because who's the most effective predator in any kind of biological system? The one who has the camouflage and can move among them. So why is it so important? Why is it a big deal? Well, because of the failure to deal with this issue thus far, we are waking up. We have depression. Millions and millions of people's lives are destroyed by them. They marry them, they have their finances destroyed by them, they're bullied by them at work, they have bosses who torture them. Saw that very, very evidently when I worked on Wall Street. They cause economic chaos. You tell anybody at those meetings they all have, trilateral, Bilderberger, and all these other things, have they resulted in economic stability? They've resulted in the exact opposite, economic chaos, because that's what they want. And then social chaos. The world shouldn't be as difficult to live in as it is. Life should be a lot easier than it is. but they manufacture chaos, because when you have chaos, when you have confusion, you're going to be more likely to hand your own personal sovereignty over to people that you think are going to fix it for you. And then murder by suicide, that's the most common way they kill people. They drive people to extreme depression through bullying and harassment. They hope to kill themselves. And workplace bullying. Anyone who's a big-time internet bully, or someone who stalks people on the internet, or whips up smear campaigns, and all, it's always a psychopath. They can't. This is what they want. They're hoping those people will kill themselves. And then greed is good. Gordon Gekko in the Wall Street movie, he said greed was good, and that became the archetype for the. You see, they're very sneaky. They will show Gordon Gekko being arrested in that film, and he's a bad guy, but he's also being portrayed as a cool guy because he has the beautiful girlfriend and wives and the fastest cars. So, although in that movie Wall Street, there's Michael Douglas giving the speech about greed is good, and we're supposed to think, oh, he's just a bad guy, but in reality, they're twisting our perceptions to create a new normal, so we actually think greed is good. You see, what happens is, they're sending one message. You see, this is my last book, Animal the Psyche, talks about this. They fire two messages at you. One is consciousness, and the other one goes for your subconscious. And that's the one they really want to give you. They want to get to the archetypal core of your personality, to impose belief packages upon you. And it's delivered never directly, it's always indirectly. And, okay, we'll talk about the personal stuff, how we meet them in our personal lives. How do psychopaths enter into our personal lives? Usually it's personal relationships. Facebook is a dream come true for them. They can learn everything about you, monitor you, know all your problems. I saw a post there last year, a woman says, I have the perfect home, I've got the perfect job, all I need now is the perfect man. And I could just see a million psychopaths going, ding ding, and they're all going to go in there, and they're all going to look at our hobbies, see where our cats are. They'll join all the cat associations. They'll pretend they're all into this stuff. They'll pretend that they'll look up, oh, she's a Protestant, suddenly he'll be a Protestant. Oh, she's into African charities, better sponsor some babies in Africa quick. And so when he approaches her, hi, I just want to say you have a lovely, your tabby, is lovely. And she goes, oh, thank you. And I just noticed that you support that same charity in Africa I do. Yes. Here comes the angel. Here comes the Saviour. And my God, will that woman be, what she's done is, she's someone who's jumped into the sea full of sharks and cut herself, and just wait for the sharks to come. We have to learn how to be very, very guarded about our personal lives online, because you'll notice that they want us to put our whole personal lives out there. That's why you have all these disgusting celebrity magazines, putting every aspect of all these personal lives into these celebrities, their sex lives and everything they've ever done. Even if a drunk, they get on the cover of a magazine. We have to be very guarded now, like our grandparents used to be, of our personal lives. Social groups and committees, not you guys, of course, but I mean, that's where I first met them, when I was in an organisation, one guy there, and looking back on it now, and I can only say I've only met about 5 in my whole life, and I'm in my late 40s, so I've met 5, so that's how rare, and I've done a lot. I've lived all over the world, and I've been in the music business a lot, but I've met 5 for certain, and maybe 5 that I'm not completely 100% sure about, and the rest were just like regular idiots and stuff like that. But the one in a political group in Ireland I was working in, he was unbelievable. He was spreading rumours about people, and he came in to try and take it over by doing a whispering campaign, turning you against you, you against you. And eventually, the horrific rumours and absolute lies, but they tell a lie that's so deep and so bad that it'll be so dark that you don't dare question it. You understand? Like human beings are funny that way. They won't believe a regular lie, but they'll believe the most intense lies. Like you can tell someone, there's that film Shaun of the Dead where the guy's joking and looking at the guys in the pub, and he goes, see him killed his wife buried in the basement. And it's like, what have you just said to him? Because there's something we're looking for, something more deep, so we can judge people. We're always told to judge people. That's why a very important aspect of this is to become a better human being. And in the workplace, that's where so many of the bullying goes on. We all have crazy bosses. Even if they're not psychopathic, you could have an environment in a job where you could have a psychopathic system where it takes people who are not psychopathic and makes them psychopathic. They, you know, like where they say like that movie Glengarry again, Ross, they weren't psychopaths, those guys, but they were under such pressure to make closes on houses and close those deals that they were turned into psychopaths. They were just ruthless, cold-blooded, arrogant haters of each other. But it was, it was because the company demanded they had to close so many deals a month. Humanity and decency goes down the gutter. And a psychopath thrives in an environment like that because he'll destroy another human being to like get his job. And then internet and social media, like I said, we have to be careful online. They're very good at whipping up smear campaigns, hating people, all that kind of thing to take the heat off themselves. So, you know, this is the most common question. Well, what makes them? How do they come about? Is it DNA? Is it a genetic predisposition? Well, I haven't seen any hardcore proof of that. Not yet. I'm not saying it isn't. I haven't seen it yet. That's a difference. I've seen a lot of wishful thinking. I've seen a lot of like things where they study twins, but when you really look at it, they haven't produced a hardcore thing yet. It's just not there. They're trying desperately to prove everything is in the genes because for some reason we have an elite that run this planet that are obsessed with genetics. And I would actually say that somehow there's something about psychopaths that they're obsessed with genetics. I don't know what that's about, but it's very interesting. And I'm very interested, it's very, you know, that they're obsessed with genetics. They're obsessed with every aspect of it. I'm not saying geneticists are psychopaths and that, but I'm just saying about that. They're obsessed with the blood and breeding and pedigree and who has bad seed and all that kind of nonsense. So that hard proof hasn't come in. Childhood trauma, well, you wouldn't get a psychopath necessarily from a childhood trauma, but you would get what I call a proto-psychopath. A proto-psychopath would be someone who would emulate a lot of the behaviours of psychopaths, but it wouldn't be as dark or devious. They'd be more like angry people who are lashing out at the world. Someone who was abused as a child, had an alcoholic father who slapped them around or something. Somebody who had some really bad relationships one after the other. Didn't trust women ever again. You know, they wouldn't be evil people. They would be victims of war or even the military, all that kind of thing. Thank you very much. And they would not be evil people. They would not be sadistic, you know, manipulators, but they would be damaged people. If you could get those people, you could fix them. We all hear the stories about the kids who go to the troubled inner city kids, and they send to the country where they work on a farm for a summer, and they come back new people. You know, that could be a proto-psychopath. They can be fixed. But that's another thing where we shouldn't be judging everyone right away. Brain injury. Well, the brain thing is interesting because, you know, I was not attacked, but like very arrogantly by some guy on the internet saying, well, it's been shown that their frontal cortex is damaged. And I'm saying, the prefrontal cortex is your modern human brain, this part here, where your emotions, where you process dreams, psychopaths don't dream, where you have your smells and you have things like that in it. Psychopaths, it's been shown that psychopaths don't have or have a very poor sense of smell. Now again, to be shown that we're mature, I have a friend who can't smell anything. And the reason why is he fell off a motorcycle. But he's a lovely person. And he damaged the front of his head. And whatever the part of the brain partitions, the cerebral partitions concerned with smells, don't work in his brain. But that seems to be common. Psychopaths have a problem with smell, which is an interesting one because people have told me in relationship with them. He used to cover himself in cologne. And people used to be like, and he couldn't smell it. Or like there was often many serial killers, John Wayne Gacy, because they could smell the dead bodies underneath the house and he couldn't smell it. Interesting. But it's a brain injury now, it's not. Their frontal cortex is fine, it's all there, they just don't use it. They seem to be mostly locked in the reptilian part of their brainstem, which I'll talk about a bit later. And it's a horses for courses thing. They don't need their compassionate brain. They don't need that. They only switch on the predatory parts of their brain. Literally. They only need it's all there. The frontal cortex is there, it's functioning, the blood vessels are working, the nerve systems are working, the mirror neurons, the motor neurons, it's all there. The synapses are firing, but they don't use it. It's spooky. It's almost like this other creature entered into a human body and only operated what it needs. And this could be, this is where I'm actually heading with a lot of stuff. I'm not saying this is for certain either. But there's a fluke called a lancet fluke. It's actually a worm that lives on cow dung. And what it does is when the cow when the ant gets on the cow dung and eats the cow dung, the eggs of the lancet fluke they hatch inside the brain of the ant. They eat the ant's brain, and then they take, this is incredible when you think about it, and then they take control of the ant's nervous system, and they drive the ant around like a machine, like a JCB, just by the exoskeleton. That's frightening to think that. They're now discovering that there are viruses in humans that do the same. There's a virus that spreads through sex and it gets into your brain. It was covered in the Telegraph did a story last week. Don't ask me the name, I can't remember. And there are more of these viruses that go into the human brain, and they seem to make people want to go, that have never been socializing, to go out to bars and nightclubs and try and pick up someone so they can have sex with them in order to spread the virus. It's ironic that we consider ourselves the biggest creature in the universe, but our neurology may be damaged by things like this. This also brings up something quite sinister. Is this why all these apparently psychopathic business leaders have their G8s, their Bilderbergers, their trilateral meetings? Is this why they seem to have sex rituals? Why they bust in prostitutes into climate change conventions? You wonder, we could be dealing with something very, very dark here. And my attitude of psychopaths is, when you discover one is in your life, you get the hell away from them. There's no confrontation. There's nothing. You get away from them and have nothing to do with them ever again. Could we be dealing with something like that? I don't know. But until we find out what causes this, we have nothing. We quarantine ourselves away from them. And is there social and environmental factors? Pollution, vaccines, I heard it all. Who knows? But, I'll tell you, what really I've discovered is that they seem to just show up anywhere. There was a story in the New York Times 2 years ago about a place in Miami where they got kids who had been diagnosed as psychopathic, and they wanted to study them. These were young kids now, primary school kids. Well, they wanted to study them, right? And they put them in the centre, and they saw that they were like little horrible psychopaths. They were all evil and devious, manipulative and planning. So there's no such thing as innocent children. All children are born innocent. And what the most amazing thing was, they came from families where there was no history of psychopathology. Their siblings were not psychopathic, and neither were their parents. And as far as they could tell in the family, there was nothing else to indicate there were any psychopaths in the family. As it stands right now, until we have better research, they just seem to arrive out of nowhere. Again, it's very spooky. It's almost like an alien consciousness entering a human body. Just how dangerous are they? Well, they're horrible. They destroy people's lives. People in relationships with them develop all kinds of things from cancer to neurological disorders. Their minds are destroyed, their self-esteem is destroyed, their lives are destroyed, everything's destroyed, and they lose their self-confidence, and their energy is taken. That's another thing. Elderly psychopaths or handicapped psychopaths do exist, and what they do is they make people do things for them all the time, even when they don't need them. You like Andy from Lou and Andy on Little Britain. He's a little psychopath. The way he destroyed that other guy's life by just, pretending he's ill, or he throws himself. Or he had a girlfriend in one episode, and he was all happy he had a girlfriend. And when he went to the bathroom and came back, the guy in the wheelchair was lying on the floor. She did that to me. This is like, they'll steal their energy, and they will steal your life any way they can. Don't all assume they're like some kind of good-looking guy who's a smooth guy with the chicks or anything like that. There's lots of them that are not like that, but they'll get you in other ways. They'll get you to pity them and things like that. They will accentuate. Ted Bundy used to get, compassionate, sensitive, and caring women by walking along like this with a walking stick, pretend he had a limp. They're evil. They're pure evil. And we'll discuss what evil is. What can trigger the removal of the mask? A few things. They're no use to you anymore. You'll be wondering, who the hell, where has my husband gone? Who is this person? Who am I talking to here? He's completely different. You're just no use anymore. They don't have to play that role for you anymore. The actor has a new role and he's left town. And that's going to be very disturbing if you love someone that happens to them. That can really mess up your head. Or you really trusted someone. They do it in business as well. Let's start a business. I got a great idea for a business. We'll open a month for a place. I've got this idea of franchise. And they get in together, and as soon as the guy has some kind of power over the business, or he's going to jump to another business, or he's going to leave it to half the finances and the money, it'll suddenly change. It can be very damaging to people, psychologically. So the mask can be removed like that. I'll give you a classic one. The beautiful, wonderful Hillary Clinton. God love her, you know, she's wonderful. After Gaddafi was murdered, she was filmed on CBS, and she went, "We came, we conquered,
I mean,
and
that
we
is the
killed."
land of unconfirmed reports.
Yes, we came, we saw, he died.
Did it have anything?
Mental. Look at that video on YouTube. It's extremely disturbing. That's a psychopath letting a mask go. What kind of normal human being celebrates with a giddy fit? This is the adrenaline in the front of their brain. Psychopaths are addicted to adrenaline. They have a thing called the rush. They don't have happiness, but they have the rush. And this is also called duper's delight, where a lot of them have the smirk. That kind of thing. That's caused by a release of adrenaline and the neurotransmitter dopamine in the frontal cortex, and they become addicted to it. And it's called duper's delight, and she could not control her giddiness. And you say, if you did that, you'd be arrested. If you did that tonight, you'd be sectioned. But Hillary Clinton would possibly be the next United States president. Literally, like a teenage girl at a pop concert. Yeah, and that's what we're doing. That's a classic example of the mask coming off. When you see what's behind there is not one of us. That's not a human being. And then the fight or flight reaction. Remember, I said they exist primarily in the reptilian cortex of their brainstem, which is flooded with melanin and the stress hormone norepinephrine. When they're suddenly in a state, this is why you must never, ever, ever try. You have one at work. You might think to yourself, you might pin him up against the wall. A strong young lad is saying, I want to teach him a lesson, right? And you get him up and you do that again. You think you walk away and you think that's the end of it. You'll do things like plant child porn on your computer at work. That's what they will do. There's no limit to how dark and how low they will get. And you cannot fight them. Because a human being cannot sink to that level of depravity. So the fight or flight things, they attack a rat back in the corner, and they will spread confusion, smear campaigns, to take the heat off them, and then boom, they're gone. They've jumped out. And everyone is like, where's the psychopath moves off somewhere else, begins a new life. It's just business. Now, the vast majority are not violent. They're not violent because they're nice people. They're not violent because they don't want to go to jail. If they lived in an age or a time where they could kill you and get away with it, they would do it. But it's too dangerous for them to kill. So what they do is they'll destroy you in other ways. Undermine your life, ruin your reputation, destroy your self-esteem. And that way they don't go to jail. They want you to kill yourself. They want to drive you so insane that you commit suicide. They prefer to implement emotional and psychological violence on their targets. But they're still extremely dangerous. I believe that they are causing most of a lot of teen suicides, I think, are based on that bullying by psychopaths at school. Okay, major red flags. Again, don't be going home and making a list of your neighbours or your people at work. But these are things to look out for, especially if they demonstrate appalling behaviour all their lives. They've used people, they've married people and dumped them, they've broken endless amounts of hearts, they've constantly abandoned families, they've wrecked businesses, they've just caused mayhem in their lives. Manipulation of others by playing on their insecurities and unresolved personal issues. You see, this is really deep now. If you have a problem, they will actually find a way to exploit it. You didn't have a father growing up, he'll be your daddy, he'll make up for that. You didn't have like a really fulfilling romantic life with your last partner, he'll be straight out of a Mills and Boons novel. They'll give you what you want. This is why it's the democracy is perfect for psychopaths, because tell me what you want, tell me what you'll vote for, and I'll become that. That's why psychopaths actually thrive in democracies. They'll play on what your insecurities are. This is why there was a fantastic film in the 90s called This Is England, and it was about the skinhead movement in England in the 70s. In the late 70s, during the Falklands War. And it's a fantastic portrayal of a psychopath taking a child whose father had died in the Falklands War. And this psychopath, skinhead, now the other skinheads were actually good kids, But this one psychopath becomes his daddy. You understand? His daddy died in the Falklands War. First he says that the war is evil, and then he says to him, you're just like me when I was your age. And suddenly he turns that child into a little monster that works for him. Very good film, definitely worth watching. So, and there's no remorse. I just don't care. I mean, you won't get care. You can sit there, you will not get an apology off a psychopath. You will not get an apology. It's the most amazing thing. The hard word never to apologize. Because they have persona switching, and the one that damaged you is the one that's responsible for what they did, but not the new version of themselves. It's very spooky kind of like ways they have of cognitive awareness. So you might get, after they've destroyed your life, ruined it, you might get, I'm sorry you're feeling like this. That's not an apology. That's just putting it back on you. It's you're at the fault because you're the one who's going through the emotional crisis today that's pissing them off. Or you might get, namaste, some crap like that. Do not tolerate these people. A normal person will say, look, shit, I'm sorry. I really feel bad about this. This was just wrong. That's what normal people do. There may be a while where there's an anger and a bit of frustration, but after a while you'll find that nearly every decent person will email you or talk to you years down the road and say, you know, remember that time when we had that big fall now? I feel really bad about it, I'm sorry. Psychopaths will never do that, ever. They just don't feel any kind of remorse or guilt. So they use pity to manipulate others. Again, they're looking for compassionate, caring, kind people. They're looking for human decency. Don't we all want to save the animals and save the planet and all that stuff? So they fill our TV shows full of compassionate things about, you know, meerkats and polar bears and all these cute little animals that we have to save. But that's just being used for them to raise taxes. That's all that is. That's nothing to do. You know, the ones who are doing it, like Prince Philip, are shooting the animals. You know, the World Wildlife Fund is not about saving animals, but it appeals to our decency. They're always appealing to our own humanity. Ironically, they see our decency and our compassion as personality disorder for them to exploit. Invented personas, we spoke about that. Cryptic or missing past histories. This is one to look for. A lot of them have, you can never really get to a lot of the adult ones now, you can never really get to the truth of their background. Oh, I did this, I did that, I worked here. And when you look, you can never find the photographs. Or their timelines don't match up. And when you do, say for some reason, do an investigation on them, what you find is a completely different person than what they told you were. You might find they were in prison for a while. They were married to 2 women and had like 10 kids and never told you about. They may have declared bankruptcy 4 or 5 times. And they told you that they were a hardcore flash businessman. Great success, and you believed it. A big one is they always make up stories that they were big shots in the military. For a lot of the males do this. That they were big shots, you know, they were like, you know, I was in this war, that war, I was a hard man, I did it all. And they'll do things like buy regimental berets and medals and stuff from eBay, and they'll put them in display cabinets and actually believe it. This is what you're dealing with. You're not dealing with a normal person. So that's the invented persona there, because it's an actor going on the stage. It's an actor getting on stage. Cryptic or missing past history timelines. Relationships always end badly. You notice it's a great giveaway. Every psychopath I've ever noticed, all their exes are all alcoholics, lunatics, criminals, but they're as pure as the driven snow. That's a real giveaway. Because they always, it's amazing where human beings will say, you mean, okay, the last wife was an alcoholic, the one before that was a nutcase. The wife before that messed around on him. The wife before was also an alcoholic. And then he never think to himself, is he just saying that to get pity? And he is. He's destroying the reputations of the previous ones. And guess what? When he's done with you, you'll find yourself in that shit list too as well with your own thing. So this is what they're like. Look for people who are like all their relationships end badly, end as a mess. Now we all have relationships that end badly, but I mean they end really badly. They leave people completely devastated that they probably never want to get into a relationship ever again. And then it's a smear campaign. Oh, I never told you about this, but she was a heroin addict. And you go, what? And you go, oh, she was a heroin addict. Yeah. Or, well, I found photographs of naked 12-year-old girls on his computer. What? I'd never even seen them even talk about regular pornography. Oh, well, he did it. I had to leave him for that reason. They create horrors by them. They create horrors. They create miserable, shocking stories. And they have a history of being bailed out by enablers. It's usually a family member. They always go back to their mother after they wreck someone's life, after they go back to a brother, they go back. So they'll always keep somebody in reserve who is an enabler, that always not will forgive them, or because often they don't know the full story of the history of their lives. They'll just say, "Oh, ma, I had a bad time. I was with this woman, and it just didn't work out. She had a drug problem, and she could have been perfectly normal, nice person." And the mother only hears that side of the story, and that's a lot of them do that. So before we go to this break, remember, this is a toolkit I'm giving here tonight. This is the intro. This is only scratching the surface. My books deal with it much more in depth. Maturity. Don't diagnose people, don't diagnose yourself, but I can guarantee you, every one of you in this room, and I've set off a thing in your head where you said, "Oh, so that was what his name was like," where someone put his wife or his family through hell constantly, or someone who bullied you at work. We all met them. By the time you're 30, you've met at least one. But remember, the 1% or 4% at the top of society. Now, for the second part of this after the break, we're going to talk about, well, what this means to the human race, what this means to us as a species, and how we can develop from this. So, want to take a break now? Yeah. Okay, thank you very much. Like I said, this is huge, it's gigantic. I haven't even scratched the surface tonight, but I'm trying to, forgive me if I'm flying through this because we're limited by time. We've discussed very briefly the impact of the psychopath in society, mainly as the individual that lives amongst us. I want to go to the bigger picture now, see what this means for us as a human race, as a species. You ask somebody, what is a human being? What is a human being? We're constantly told we're selfish, we're materialistic, we're racist, we're bigoted, and all these other things. But there's a 12th century poem by a Persian poet called Saud-i, and it goes, "Human beings are members of a whole. In creation, one essence and soul. If one member is afflicted with pain, other members uneasy will remain. If you have no sympathy for human pain, the name of human you cannot retain." And even back then, they were aware that there were people that lived amongst us that were not like other human beings. They did not care about others. And that's what a human being is. We have empathy, compassion, care, understanding, and we don't like to see an innocent person or a bystander, even if they're a stranger, suffering. Human nature is to help our own species. Power and pathology. In his paper, Intelligence as a Person-Situation Interaction, Dr. Robert Sternberg listed 5 fallacies of critical thinking. He states, "There is another dimension to a person-situation interaction, the extent to which a particular situation elicits stupid thinking in intelligent people. All of his 5 fallacies range from a sense of godlike indestructibility to extreme hubris, and occur mainly in the context of perceived or actual power and dominance over others." We live in a society where power and might makes right. It's not a human condition. We're not naturally like this. Aboriginal, indigenous people are not like this. This came out of the Babylonian Empire about 3,500 years ago. The idea that some human beings had to have control excuse me, over others. And it's almost become the fodder or the food to feed the psychopath. Now, why is the world a mess? Why is there chaos? Why is there wars? Why does the United States lock up more people than every other country in the world combined put together? It's because of the business model. Psychopaths are just business. They're only interested in getting what needs to be done. And human feelings and human lives and human anything, health of human society, it doesn't matter to them. They do not care. And they will do whatever they want. And this cartoon I found a few years ago is perfect. You have the general on one side killing, the businessman on the other side profits, and they're loving it because they're both feeding each other. There's no profit for the psychopath in human contentment and peaceful coexistence. If we lived in a world that didn't have chaos out of order, we would have order out of chaos, and we wouldn't have a business. Because remember, half the things that we're sold, probably maybe close to 90% of the things we are sold and marketed to us are panaceas for problems that we didn't create. Problems in our psychology, problems in our society, problems in our personality, problems in our economic situation. We did not create them. The psychopath will create them and then sell you the panacea. The United States has locked up more people than any other nation on earth. 500,000 more than China, which is a population 5 times greater than the United States. The United States has 25% of the world's prison population. I believe it's up to 27% now. With only 5% of the world's people. The perfect partnership between government, corporations, merged together into a single agenda. They created a series of laws in the United States in the 1980s called 3 strikes and you're out. You commit 3 minor offences, you can go to prison in some states for life. They want free slavery. Slavery still exists in the United States. It's called prisons. They lock people up on incredible long sentences, on very minor charges, and they look for people who are not destructive or violent because they want a prison force that will do as it's told. So they give people who are not particularly dangerous long incarcerations in prison sentences in order to get them making jeans, paint and everything else. In America you can go to trade shows where you can buy a prison for your county and all the different things in there, and then you can find companies which will find consultants who will find out what your factory prison will make. The slavery still exists in the United States. It's just prisons now. And why? Why have the colonial powers slaughtered indigenous peoples in their hundreds of millions as civilization moved across the globe? In AD 61, Suetonius Paulinus, after enormous logistical efforts at a time when Romano Britain was in deep economic chaos, managed to get his army across the Menai Straits in Wales and massacre the last of the Druids. They're terrified of indigenous people because indigenous people don't seem to have psychopaths. I've looked all over indigenous cultures and they don't have them because they would not survive in an indigenous culture. They kill them off right away. They'll take them hunting and drop them off a cliff because the survival of the tribe is too, it's too connected to everyone working together. And if you have one who goes behind the scenes and is robbing the tents, the huts, and having sex with the women while the men are out hunting, he's a liability. He causes chaos in the tribe. It makes them vulnerable to attack. The psychopath does not seem to exist within native cultures. It seems to be only in Western society predominantly. So, this tome, this thing, after I wrote the book Puzzling People, which became a kind of a cult classic, surprisingly to me, I started to look, well, where's the psychopath in history? Where are they? How have human beings dealt with this in the past? How have human beings rationalized this? Psychopaths can't be a brand new thing. It has to have always been with us. Well, I could find little or no evidence, in fact none, if I have to be honest, of psychopathology in prehistory. In fact, it's quite the opposite. They're always finding graves of handicapped people who died of old age, and they're being lovingly buried in prehistoric graves, and that means that somebody took care of them. That's completely different than the story they sold us of the caveman. This is kind of a Darwinian thug who kills and just is only interested in his own selfish needs. There's a lot of evidence that actual ancient peoples were probably more compassionate than we were because there was no pollution of their culture by psychopathology. But then it gets interesting. I told you we're going to get a roller coaster here tonight. We're going back into history now. Zoroastrianism. Zoroastrianism appeared in about the 6th century. Before that you had polytheism, which means that people worshipped a myriad of gods. There was gods in the trees, gods in the forest, gods in the rivers, gods in the sky, goddesses in everything. Those gods and goddesses everywhere. And about sometime in the 6th century BC, a cult or a religion, whatever you want to call it, called Zoroastrianism arrived. And they were the first ones to come up with the idea of good and evil. One side was good and one side was evil. And all you had to do then was to determine which was good and which was evil. So you could just point out your enemy as being evil, and he was evil. He was evil in the eyes of God. And this gap between good and evil, this gap between this flux, this space between the demarcation lines between what's considered good and what's considered evil, is where the psychopath flourishes. Because all the psychopath has to do to protect himself or to get power is to declare another race evil, another religion evil. Anyone outside our circle is evil. If you don't serve me, you're evil. And this dualism, now dualism is actually an interesting idea, particularly in terms of Neoplatonists and these kinds of ideas of the dualistic aspect of reality. Very interesting stuff. But the psychopath manipulated it. Because the universe is a dualistic universe, everything is a poles. Those poles, the interaction of those poles create novelty, and that's what creates the universe. But if you're getting your hands on some kind of dualistic framework, all you have to do is manipulate it. And this is how the psychopath came to power in the West. As soon as polytheism, Gore Vidal said, the greatest catastrophe that ever afflicted Western civilization was the creation of monotheism, one God. So Babylon, that's where it begins. You always hear about Bob Marley talk about Babylon. We're always hearing about Babylon. Why is it so powerful? Well, because Babylon is where they first industrialized human control, where systems and methods were used to control humans, where agriculture. From 1894 BC to 320 BC, Babylon was a culture obsessed with consuming demonic worship and iconic representations of demonic effigies. Babylonians were a demon-worshipping culture. They had demons for everything. They were a very dark culture that came out of nowhere. They were the first ones to use agriculture. They were very good at engineering, very good at irrigation systems. And when they took control of agriculture, they used it to control the people. Well, how do you control people? You cut off their food. They're not behaving themselves, you cut off their food. This is where the world we live in came from. This is Babylon. Hello, I was here. According to Morris Jastro's Religion of Babylonia and our city, these demons lurked in remote or hidden places such as graves, mountaintops, and the shadows and ruins. They would go at night, enter homes through holes, crevices, and torture their victims. They were responsible for anything bad that happened. You see, Babylon started worshipping the demon because the psychopath came to the top. I used to work in Lower Manhattan, and I used to look across those old 1920s skyscrapers, and they were filled with gargoyles, just like the gargoyles around these cathedrals. Why are cathedrals filled with monsters? Because the control system is representing the reptilian complex of the human brain. The archetypes, as Carl Jung told us, they always come streaming through from the surface. If you enter a large building that's filled with these demonic effigies, you're getting an insight into the control structure behind it. That's why the Fifth Avenue, the Chrysler building, has 4 big gargoyles on the corner in Manhattan. That's why gargoyles are encrusted all over buildings. Babylonians believed that spirits came down in the rain, said that, and for most of the chronological time frame of Sumerian culture, the gods were demons. There was no distinction. Demons were depicted as anthropomorphic grotesques, winged bulls or lines of human heads, serpent's tail. Human beings didn't do this before that. Cave art wasn't like this. I'm going to talk about that a bit later. We were in a different consciousness of humanity now. Babylon had changed. It was a different thing altogether. It was about power and control. And the archetypes always come true and tell you what you really are. They tell you what you are living in. And the world you live in is a reflection of what's the power structure behind it. Then, the idea of you have a stratification, a hierarchical system in a religion, in a society, in politics, anything, you're going to get the idea of some humans are better than others. Especially if the more pathological ones, or the system is created where the more pathological ones can rise to the top. So what happened by the time we got to Greece? Here's how the idea of the better human came along. Long before Rudolph Valentino and Elvis Presley, the masses were first introduced into the notion of the divine persona through the complex and often magical performances derived from venerating the Dionysian cults. Dionysus was the first rock star. This was sort of like a religion, cult / entertainment kind of archetype throughout Greece. the idea that he was a divine persona, he was a human being that was better than anyone. He was often depicted in chariots that were stretched, followed by his groupies. He was in a stretched limo. The first stretched limo in history depicts Dionysus going to a performance, followed by women in states of ecstatic euphoria. This was the psychopath trying to drum this idea that somehow some humans are better than others and they're more sexually attractive because they're a superior human being. This is the world we live in today. This is how we're programmed to worship celebrities. So it started in Babylon with the stratification and hierarchy of the system. The pathological types would rise to the top. The next thing they did then was to develop a situation that if you were famous, you were better. And that's what led to what we have today with the X Factor and all these other shows. Your 5 minutes of fame makes you better. If you're 5 minutes of fame and 50 years of working in McDonald's, at least you had your 5 minutes of fame. They've ramped that up to extremes now, but this is when it began. Because the psychopath depends on making us forget what that poem said at the beginning. That our humanity is based upon our decency, our goodness, and our kindness towards each other, and not who we are. Not what we are, it's who we are as people. But a psychopathic system has to make you believe that you are an object yourself, that you judge yourself by your job, your money, and your status. And they do that by creating a divine persona. When they have a divine persona, it's always held up as what you should be. And we've all fallen into that trap. So we had in Greece was polytheistic as well, but Greece was an interesting one because Greek civilization probably went into decline when they took their gods from the earth and placed them in the sky as constellations. Because before that they lived close up with their gods. They lived in the trees, Mount Olympus. Then they put them in the skies to constellations. And that was actually the beginning of the end of Greek culture. And then as the beginning of the Roman culture came along, and then this became the psychopath's ace. This was the ace up their sleeve that they've always wanted to come out with. The Council of Nicaea, a council of Christian bishops convened in Nicaea, Turkey, by the Roman Emperor Constantine, a guy kicked his wife to death in AD 325. A guy who was not a Christian, he just saw, like a psychopath, he saw how useful it would be for bonding the empire. Established the true nature of the Son of God, Jesus. Before that, the Gnostics considered Jesus to be just a great teacher, which is all he was, but they had to make him seem like a god. And the relationship to God the Father, the construction of the first part of the Creed of Nicaea, which is the Bible that we use today. Important texts were left out. Gospel of St. Thomas, the Gospel of Mary Magdalene, the Gospel of Judas. The emergence of the book burning and censorship public policy, and the recording of history as official representations or reinterpretations of facts. For instance, now, Constantine had decided who God was. Wrote a bunch of books, had them all put together, and said, this is your God, and all the other stuff doesn't exist. And why did he do that? Because he was welding the God of the earth, the Roman Emperor, to the God of heaven. Monotheism, one God. On earth, one king, one pope, one emperor. And who does he represent? So when you go against the regent, the emperor, you're going against God. So they've taken, this is why I always say psychopaths all think they're God inside. And they officially entrenched that into Western society at the Council of Nicaea. I don't mean to put down anyone's state here if you're a Christian or Jews or anything. This is not about religion, I'm talking about how human beings mess this stuff up. So this is an interesting one. This is the psychopaths, they'll often tell you one thing and do another. Climate change summits. They're telling us to freeze to death in the winter, not put our lights on, and yet they're flying all over the world to attend climate change summits in Fiji, staying in first-class hotels, while telling the rest of us to get back. One of the main reason why the Romans destroyed the Druidic religions in the Celtic and the Gaulish countries was because they said they practiced human sacrifice. They're not civilized. Druids practice human sacrifice. We have to stop it by outlawing the Druidic religion. At the same time, they were doing this in the Colosseum. Psychopaths have no sense of self-referral. They do not. You think it's the most incredible hypocrisy, but it's not. They literally are. They just don't think about it. To a normal person, you go, how can you actually say? How can you ban the Druidic religion? And use the rationale for it was an edict to stop human sacrifice. When you were throwing people to the lions or having gladiators slash each other to pieces inside arenas in Rome, and they would go, whatever. They wouldn't think about it. And you could never rationalize with them. This is what a psychopath is like. This is why this subject is so gigantic. Because it's really true, the old adage, as above, so below. The world at the top is a mess, but it's reflected in the world below us. And this is why this is such a deep, deep subject. Because if you can understand how the psychopath works on the street, then you can look at the world and you can understand why the world is a mess, because it is the way it is. Because we have a psychopathic system. I call the psychopathic control grid running this world. Now we're going on our tragical history tour. This is such an interesting subject. The Gnostics. The Gnostics were the sort of sects that came out of the early Christianity. They weren't all the same. There was diversity in the Gnostics, but generally their belief was that Jesus Christ was not the Son of God. He was just a fantastic teacher. He was a revolutionary. And this document was found in 1947 called the Nag Hammadi text. And what the Nag Hammadi text was probably, along with the Dead Sea Scrolls, the most valuable document found in Western history, because it was the source. It was the source of Christianity right back to the beginning. So no emperor, no cardinal, no pope had interfered with it. We were getting the source here. And it's unbelievably interesting. They spoke about a group called the Archons. And what they said the Archons was a mind parasite that generally infected bureaucracies and bureaucratic individuals. They would speak about Jerusalem and Alexandria being filled with Archons. And they believed it was literally a parasite that caused people to have no decency, no goodness, no kindness. What they were talking about was the psychopath. Particularly the psychopath in terms of power, administration. The Gnostics were brutally oppressed by the early church, Romans, because these guys knew the story. Now, these guys were Christians. Let's not get that wrong. We have a very limited understanding of Christianity, what it is. It was much more diverse and much more esoteric than we've been led to believe. But along with this notion of the Archons, this group, this mind parasite, this non-human consciousness that would take over human bodies, they also believed the planet Earth was a living being, which is an incredibly radical thing for Christianity. But they believed the planet Earth was called Sophia Gaia, and it was a living creature. It was alive, and we were like on it. We were just as much part of it. We weren't disconnected from it. We were part of it. And more amazing as well is that the Gnostics, well, not all Gnostic sects, but many of them believed that the God of the Bible, Jehovah, was actually a psychopathic demon, an imposter, who had the Old Testament was written by a demon called Jehovah or Yahweh, who was pretending to be God, who took the credit for creation from Sophia Gaia, and he was the one who wanted sacrifice, murder, wars, suffering, pain, and death. And that's what they believed. And they were wiped out and destroyed because of it. And there's clues. This is a Jehovah's Witness Bible I found. Again, I am not putting down anyone's religion. In here, it talks about, I don't want to get out of the camera frame, but this is Genesis, the first page. And you go through it, and you see, and God created this, and God created the earth, you know, the usual stuff we always hear. And then, right before the creation of humans, it suddenly becomes the Jehovah God. What? Who's this guy? Where did he come? Why was it God for the beginning of creation, and then suddenly this thing called a Jehovah God shows up? And this is what the Gnostics believed, that the earth was created by a god and the universe. But this thing, Jehovah God, was a psychopathic demon who jumped in and took all the credit. And that was the one who caused all the misery for human beings and created the idea of original sin. And the Gnostics used to have hand signals, and this is called the benediction malediction. You see the Pope doing it. Because this, well, in dualism, there's the idea of opposites. When you cast the light upon a shadow, it casts the shape of a devil head on the wall. You see that? That was their way of signaling that this is not actually God, it's Jehovah the demon. You can see the demon cast there. This was an old idea that they had. The Gnostics were trying to keep the idea alive that human beings were actually good and decent, and we were robbed because of psychopathic powers had taken over religion in the West. And that's also why they got rid of the Druids and all the indigenous people. This is why the psychopathic system in the West is obsessed with wiping indigenous people even to this day off the face of the earth, because they know the truth. Now, this is one of my favourite subjects at the moment, but it's also a very sad subject. But it shows you, when I said earlier on, when you stand up to a psychopath, they will show no mercy. There's no decency there. There was a group called the Cathars. The Cathars existed mostly in southern Europe, mainly France, a little bit of Italy, and a bit of the Balkans. They probably came out of Gnosticism, but they definitely came from a 9th century sect called the Bogomils, who were in Bulgaria. And so anyway, they were a Christian group, and they were a very interesting group. Now bear in mind that they used to, like the Gnostics, they believed that the Old Testament was written by the devil, Jehovah, whatever. And they believed that only the New Testament, Jesus, was all you had to worry about. That was all you should concern yourself with. Jesus, and that's it, right? That's the part. They didn't believe Jesus was the Son of God. Again, he was the great teacher who came down and he stood up to the system by pointing out that the old system was evil. And they would not worship the crucifix because they said Catholicism was a death cult. And when the Inquisition was founded many hundreds of years before the Reformation, the Inquisition was founded with this, but the Dominicans also was part of that as well, this oppression. And they said to them, why do you deny the crucifix? And the answer that the Cathars would always give was, would you worship the gallows that your father was hung upon? They used to accuse Catholicism of being a death cult. The Cathars were remarkable. Women had equal rights as men, including in terms of property ownership. We're talking about the 1100s. Women and men could become perfects, which was the priest class. And the priest class were generally vegetarians. All Cathars believed in reincarnation, and the reincarnation was voluntary. You could come back as much as you want. More significantly, the Cathars believed that this was hell. That where we live right now on this planet was hell. This was it. But it wasn't so bad. You could make love to girls, you could drink wine, you could have parties, you could dance. A lot of fun. But this is hell. This is evil, this is bad. And human beings' natural state was a spiritual state. And a Cathar could choose to come back and reincarnate. Now remember this, just at the time of the persecution by the Catholic Church. You know, this is a dark time. And you were given a choice to join the Catholic Church with its flagellants whipping themselves, its sacraments, its penance, its darkness. Or these guys, who were all easygoing, laid back, no problem. Jews and Muslims and Catholics held positions of power within their courts because they had no idea. That was one of the charges leveled against them. They were too nice. Why were you giving jobs to Jews and Muslims? They were so distrusting of the Catholic Church that the greatest insult that a Cathar could give, if you accused a Cathar of doing something bad, his response would be, what do you take me for, a priest? That was the worst insult possible. And what happened was Catholicism was dying. There was over 1.25 million in southern France, we're talking about in the 1100s, Cathars. The Catholic Church was dying because poor Catholics were saying, to hell with this. All these priests and bishops living in palaces, we're all poor, we're told to suffer. And yet these guys were a vastly advanced organisation. They had excellent roads. Their buildings are still standing today. Brilliant engineers, tolerant societies, men and women equal rights, everything wonderful, no problems. And more importantly, they had this ritual called the consolamentum. And what the consolamentum was, if you had felt that you'd reincarnated enough times and you'd sorted out all the problems in your life, you could have this thing called the consolamentum, where two perfects would actually come to you and they perform the ritual. And they would just think about this, we're talking about the 1100s, 1000s. They would say things like, are you sure you want to not reincarnate anymore? Because there'll be no more girls, there'll be no more wine, no more parties. You'll be a pure spiritual being. Have you solved all the problems with your family? You feel your relationships have been all but good? I mean, this is just an amazing system that they had. It's hard to believe it's actually developed in Europe. And then if you did that, you were given the consolamentum. Very simple, one ritual. They didn't have churches or anything. Everything was very basic. And that meant you would not reincarnate. And the Catholic Church used to go around killing old people in elderly homes in the Cathar countries so the consolamentum could not be performed. They would burn their bodies. This is psychopaths. This is sick, because it wasn't that they had a problem with the theology, but they saw that the psychopathic system could not flourish in the Cathar system, which was very fair, balanced, and decent. It was all human decency. And also, again, if that psychopathic thing about Jehovah is true, they were marked. So they stood up to the Catholic Church, and that's when it got really dirty. They stood up by, they had very good fighters, and they were good soldiers, and they had very good equipment. And the first Inquisition went in there, and they got the big Jesus banded out of them by the Cathars. But then the Catholic Church, because it was run by psychopaths, were not going to stop with that. And they went in with a second crusade, well, a better organised crusade. And you tell me, would a human being do this to another human being? When Bram fell in 1210, 100 prisoners had their noses cropped, their lips cut off, and their eyes gouged out. One man was left with one eye so he could guide the others away to the next Cathar village as a warning. Hand and shoulder, one in front of the other, the one-eyed man at the head. A file of blind prisoners wound its way to Las Tours, a visible demonstration of the infallible mercy of God's Christian army. We let them live. And now you tell me human beings do not behave like that. If the Cathars believed that this was hell, by the time their people were destroyed and wiped off the face of the earth, it was the first genocide in Europe ever. And it was set the precedent for the anti-Semitic pogroms, the genocides of various other groups. It began with this. And it began because the Cathars stood up to the psychopathic Catholic Church of the Middle Ages. Pope Innocent III. There's an ironic name for you. He was the one behind it. And again, the archetypes all got very interested in Jungian psychology. I'm very interested in archetypes. I'm very interested in how things manifest from the subconscious world into the real world. The demons of the mind. Saint Bernard of Clairvaux said, what is the meaning of these unclean monkeys, these strange savages, lions and monsters? To what purpose are they placed, these creatures, half beast, half man? Or these spotted tigers? Notre Dame in Paris. The centers of the psychopathic system are showing their true nature by filling it with what? Babylonian demons. We're getting an insight here to where they come from. Now, human beings always had psychology. It always it wasn't called psychology and it wasn't scientifically validated, but it still existed, and it was mostly in folk tales, folklore, and that kind of thing, stories to help people deal with these predatory individuals and predatory situations. Here's an old painting here of a woman being consoled, and she's saying, that's not my child. That's not my child, it's been replaced. And you have a little demon going to the bed and taking the baby out and replacing with what? A psychopath. That's how they would have rationalized it. She would not have a decent child. She knew her child was evil. Again, 14th century woodcut from Holland. Woman being seduced by a devil in the guise of a handsome, well-dressed and charming man. And he's a devil. They knew these psychopaths existed in the past. They didn't have psychology to do it, but they had stories. Then there's the Reformation. There's an interesting part of history too as well. We had the witch-finder generals. Again, we had sectarian propaganda. You see, we're getting into really deep things here. I could come here, and if you ever want to have me back, I'll come here and I could talk about this stuff on a deeper level with literature and meanings and media. But this is where it began, with the invention of the printing press. The psychopath had one more tool to dehumanize human beings. One more. And we have the witch-finder general, Matthew Hopkins, convicting 2 women on the basis they just had pet dogs and cats. That was enough to make them witches. And this came out of the Puritans and the Reformation. And you know, every time the psychopaths kind of ramp it up, the decency comes flying back, because human beings do not let them away with it. We may not be able to challenge them, but we will actually change our philosophies and our cultures and our social intelligence to deal with these people. And there was a classic example, Michel de Montaigne. He was a French Protestant philosopher. I'm not sure he was Protestant, I think he was Protestant. But anyway, during the Reformation in Paris, and men are tormented by the opinions they have of things and not by the things themselves. This was the beginning of human rights, which is really a sort of an entrenched idea of human decency. The idea he was talking about, you know, he saw the horrors of the slave trade in Africa. He heard about it. He saw these awful books produced. He saw the dehumanized the indigenous people, the horrors of the Reformation. And he sat down and thought about it. He said, this is not how human beings are. And he created some beautiful philosophical works to deal with that. He's one of my heroes. But he invented the idea of human decency becoming part of our culture, which should have never happened if the psychopaths never took over, because we'd be like this naturally. But because of the horrific injustices, horrors they inflicted upon us, human beings had to actually validate human decency. Now, the Elizabethan era was an interesting one as well. You had them, it was kind of like a frantic rush between them trying to change things and us getting smarter, getting wise to them. The reconstruction of the English language. They changed the English language of today, or at the Elizabethan period, has nothing to do with the English language of Chaucer. They started to change the language in order to make people programmed, because they were starting to learn about things like epigenetics and neurology. They didn't know what these terms meant, but they knew that people repeated the same things over again. They could actually brainwash them. See, there's the beginning of brainwashing and stuff like that. They're always looking for new ways to control us. That's why they study us like a foreign species. The development of maritime technology led to things like maritime law, marine law, sea law. This idea, the growth of the East India Company, the Hudson Bay Company, these became more powerful in many countries. So this was like they had to change the rule books again. John Dee, the court magician of Elizabeth I, 007, the guy in MI5, he was an incredibly interesting character. You could do a whole thing just on him. But he was there in the middle of it, changing the English language, changing the whole ideas of how a society works. And Shakespeare was the first thing to program people through entertainment. And the Greeks were doing it in the mystery plays, but it was all very allegorical. These guys here were doing it in such a way that because they knew that English people were going to come in contact with foreigners because it was becoming a maritime country, so they had the Merchants of Venice, Romeo and Juliet, Julius Caesar, all these other characters, foreigners. And they were introduced to you because you had to do business with them. They're just like us. They weren't doing it because they were trying to make us like them. It's just that they wanted us to do business with them. You see, they're very devious and very clever. You know, they're brilliant in their deviousness. And then espionage, that's at the beginning of that, keeping dossiers, holding files. They got a lot of that from the Jesuits. The Jesuits were fantastic for that. They had, by the time the Jesuits had arrived in Peru, and you're talking about that might have well been on Mars, back in the 1500s, 1400s, within 10 years of that they had complex dossiers on even remote tribes in the back end of Peru. They're obsessed with data gathering. That's why you have Facebook. They want to know everything about us. The transformation of the Gnostics. The Gnostics kind of existed, they didn't really go away. They kind of blended through the original Illuminati. There's a lot of confusion about the Illuminati, but there's two Illuminatis. There was the original Illuminati, who were sort of like the remainder of the Gnostics. They kind of came through Freemasonry within the Grand Orient Lodge in Paris, and then there was the Bavarian Illuminati, who were like this kind of like political group that were about changing from royalist institution into sort of like political republicanism, institutionalism. And then the Holy Roman Emperor Rudolf, a very interesting character. He was Rudolf II of Bohemia, and he was a guy who was involved in very interesting things like alchemy and stuff. And he was actually destroyed because he was probably one of the better ones. He was probably one of the better monarchs, and he was starting to think out. He was developing new ways for societies to exist and so on. And they had this idea that he had tons of gold, but he didn't really. But they wiped him out. See, this is what happens. This is why we have the axis of evil today. This is why they don't like Venezuela and Chavez, why they had to go into Libya like animals and tear the place down. They do not like anyone outside the system with a different idea. Now, I'm going all over the place here. Again, I want to bring this in again, the idea that people had coping mechanisms. And alchemy, a lot of people don't understand that alchemy was also a form of almost like kind of psychology as well, because as the more the alchemists learned about the process, they were learning really about themselves. They were understanding, again, what was in the vessel was what was in their soul. And this idea came up that the human race, very interesting actually in terms of this waking up community, but they believed that the earth was made of 5 elements, earth, fire, wind, water, and the etheric, which was sort of like field, what we call the quantum field today. And you had like this idea of the chemical mountain, which represented the physiological and psychological aspect of a human being, with the beehive in the middle. And you would have the luminaries with the soul. And then you had all the different astrological symbols representing the dualistic archetypes of human beings, dignity, narcissism, and so on. Mercury representing duality at the top. But this was all about getting a balanced human being, because human beings are trying to figure out why a thing is such a mess. They would always look to themselves to cure it. Human beings have a phenomenal ability to try and fix themselves, unlike psychopaths. And it was the beginning. There's 2 dudes here in this drawing. One is at the bottom his guy here is a blindfold. He's the guy who doesn't know anything. He's walking around like this. He has no understanding. The second one is another guy who's trying to chase a rabbit into a hole. He represents the guy who knows the world has problems. There's something going on, but he's looking in the wrong places. He's looking at the rabbit running into the mountain and not realizing that the answer to all his problems is inside himself. Just like Jesus says, the kingdom of heaven is within. And so all through history, we've had these things that they're almost like the psychopaths do one thing, and the human beings create these incredible things that help them kind of deal with it. This is a book by Bruno Bettelheim. It was written in the 1970s. He was an Austrian psychiatrist. It's called The Uses of Enchantment. And it deals with the idea that around the Reformation, people were dealing with the horrors of the world in Europe, and they invented, to deal with the psychopath and to convey to children the idea of the psychopath, they invented fairy tales. And if you look at fairy tales, the majority of European fairy tales from this period about psychopaths and psychopathic behaviour, and serve as an instruction manual on how to recognise the traits and deal with them. A collective folk memory was generated and maintained in these children's stories of wicked stepmothers, deceitful kidnappers, or sly wolves disguised as kindly and familiar people, ultimately revealed to be killers, cutthroats, and cannibals. This was the beginning of the idea that human beings were compensating for the psychopathic archetype by creating our own archetypes, our own stories, our own legends, our own mythology, so we could deal with it. And so we're still doing it. Bram Stoker created Dracula. Dracula's a psychopath. The whole idea of Dracula, how he functions as a psychopath. And he can't see himself in a mirror because he can't self-reflect on his own behaviour. He seduces and uses women, drains the life out of him. And that's what these things are all about. Human beings, werewolves also. The werewolf changes into a beast. That's like the wolf in sheep's clothing. All these stories were human beings trying to rationalise the evils around them, mainly in their leadership. And we're still doing it. I think a lot of this thing about when people start to say, oh, well, the elites are reptilians and stuff. I think that's our modern mythology. That's our way of, dealing with that. I mean, I don't believe it, but I mean, that's probably why that idea came about. The idea is more of an archetypal understanding of the dysfunctional nature of our leaders, rather than they're actually really are shape-shifting reptilians. So there's a value in that as well. You understand? Even if it's wrong, there's still a value in that. It's a way of rationalizing. And a powerful way, because it works. Human beings are just, that's what we do. Right, and then we came up to the Enlightenment. The Enlightenment was pretty generally a good idea. It was to take away the power of religion and kings and try and create like something better, democracy. We all know that turned out to be a mess. But they came with the idea of reason and consensus, and the people bought into it, particularly in France. And they were like the idea, okay, we can get rid of all these evil kings and these ridiculous monarchs and all these cardinals and bishops, and we'll have a culture that runs on, you know, logic and decency and stuff like that. But the people, there was no time at all before the French Revolution was co-opted by psychopaths. You started using the same old tools. The guillotine. They chopped the heads. Now we always hear about they chopped the heads off the royalists, like the Bourbons, Marie Antoinette and a few others, but they mostly killed poor Catholics in the south of France who wouldn't succumb to the revolution. That thing killed far more poor people than it ever killed those aristocrats. And again, they could not give up on their religion. They even when they abolished Catholicism in France, they installed a goddess of reason in Notre Dame. Imagine that. That's only a psychopath would think like that. A goddess of reason, which you worship because there's no God. And then you had the secular witch hunt. So it just they went from having religious persecution to secular persecution. Then the psychopaths, you know, as they're always looking to try and look for new ways to control us. And the education system came along. This book, The School and Society by Ivan Illich, very good read. He says school is an advertising agency which makes you believe that you need society just as it is. It means no conformity. They give you a piece of paper for doing exactly what they told you to do. No individuality. And that's what that's about, because the psychopaths do not want free-thinking, intelligent people. They want robots. And that's why a reward for being the biggest robot came out of Prussia in the 1800s. The Prussians came up with a school system that was designed to have children boys come straight out of school and go right into the army, so they didn't have to spend time doing basic training. And when they implement that system, by the time the Franco-Prussian War came along, the Prussians absolutely kicked the ass of the French. They were in Paris in no time. The rest of European and American powers were so impressed by the Prussian school system that became our default school system today. School is about turning into the robots to serve the psychopath to control with. It's not about wisdom and learning. And then it goes to the next step. Psychology develops. Psychiatry develops. The understanding of the human brain. Edward Bernays, the nephew of Sigmund Freud, he was the father of propaganda and public relations. He started wars. He came up with the idea of Banana Republic because the United Fruit Company had lost their business in Central America because there had been a coup, democratic government was installed, and they had nationalized the fruit industry. He created a phony war that there was killing people and they had to go on and liberate them. And that's where the term Banana Republic came from. And they created a phony war, destroyed a democratic company in order to get the United Fruit Company back, Chiquita Bananas back into Honduras. Also, Edward Bernays got women smoking. He invented the feminist movement to get women to smoke. Isn't that amazing? You think about that. He told them that it was a symbol of standing up against male oppression would be smoking. And that was because women were not smoking back then, only men were. And they wanted to find a way to sell cigarettes to women. So they told them that a symbol of feminine empowerment was to smoke cigarettes. We're defining a man. And they paid socialites in Manhattan to walk down Fifth Avenue for smoking cigarettes. It was considered scandalous. But that's what they do. They take the upper echelon of society and they make their behavior is what we're supposed to emulate, because right back to the divine persona, the Dionysian cults, they're better than us. The same methodologies have also been implemented to utilize mythological and similar archetypes for the same reason. Often it's purely by accident, whereby the advertisers, marketers, and image makers stumble up deep into the archetypal core of the human personality, and often with spectacular success. Sociological erotomania and the cultivation of hysteria. If you really want to hear about this, get my new book, Alvin the Psyche, is about this, but the idea of fanatics, the fan, that never existed in history. They invented that. People didn't go mad for pop stars or actors in the past. That was invented for us to go mad and crazy for. You know, this is where all this hysteria, this pop star thing, erotomania is a condition where usually a woman or a gay man, sometimes it affects straight men, but it's usually always a woman or a gay man, develops an obsession with an individual believing that they're in love with them. It's really quite frightening, actually. And, you know, it could be, I'm not going to point at women here, but I could just be talking to one of you and smile. If you had erotomania, you would think, oh, he did that special for me. And like something happens and our brain gets wired really badly, you know, that kind of thing. And they start thinking, you know, that he's really fancies me, or it happens terribly badly with college tutors and college professors. A young female student develops an unbelievable crush. But what happens is their neurology starts rewiring where they believe it's true. And so what will happen is they will be walking down the street, and if their favourite colour is blue and they see a house being painted blue, they'll say, oh, he did that for me. And the man might never even know she exists. And there's some horrific stories. It's destroyed so many women's lives. No one really knows what caused it, but the people in charge realised that it was a good business idea. Because if we can get them obsessed with a pop star, they will spend a lot of money on that pop star. Elvis, the first one ever was Frank Sinatra, the Bobby Soxers. They, you know, made all these young girls, especially going through puberty, very easily manipulated. And that goes on to this day, even Justin Bieber, it never has stopped, Osmond, it's never stopped. And it only exists because of business. And most girls it's just a cute phase that the girls go through, but it makes an enormous amount of money. But they're always watching things and watching problems and understand, could we make money from this? And they recognise erotomania was something they could induce in the female population, but also in the male population. You see that especially with Lady Gaga. I'm not saying she's amazing, but how she's manipulated her audience is a masterclass in all this stuff, both males and females. And she definitely, either her or her handlers, have a phenomenal understanding of mythology and archetypes, because she plays on them all. The Mercury, the hermaphrodite at the top of the pyramid, these are very powerful things that go right to the core of their personalities, our subconscious, and make us very easy to manipulate. The cultivation of hysteria, all that kind of stuff, crazy stuff. Human beings don't behave like that. They don't go, that's not how we are, but they've made us that way to get money off us. This obsession, this celebrity obsession. The rise of popular culture, that was a fantastic way not only of making money from us, but also controlling us. All you had to do was, like, you know, if you could make your king or queen friends with all the pop stars, then you'd be less likely to revolt against them. You understand? That's why politicians are always surrounded by pop stars. You remember, like, Tony Blair, the war criminal psychopath, Cool Britannia, and he filled the 10 Downing Street with the Oasis and the Spice Girls. That was so you wouldn't see what kind of monster that creature actually was. And Freud and Jung, that was an interesting thing. That was like, you know, Sigmund Freud, he was obsessed with the idea that the human problems were all caused by sexuality, where Jung believed they were a spiritual issue. And there's probably a bit of truth in both, but you cannot reduce human beings to just sexual beings. They're more than that. And so that became the dynamic to which the 20th century played out with this stuff. The Freudian psychology that everything was sexual gave us the hardcore pornography, the idea of the sexual revolution. Feminism, hardcore feminism would be Orwell's Anti-Sex League in 1984. All that stuff came true. But they always die hard, because there's something in the human condition. And that's why all you guys are sitting here tonight. Because with all this propaganda that's been thrown against you guys, and the way you've lived your life, and I'm looking around, you're all different ages, different genders. Well, 2 genders, sorry. But like, but you're all here because you know there's something not right with the world. There's something not right with how the world is. And that they've never been able to switch that off in human beings. And that's what this awakened thing is. You're the new Cathars. You're the ones this is why we have to learn the psychopaths, because we don't want to be destroyed the same way. We have to learn to be smarter than them. Not the Cathars, the psychopaths in control. The machine mind, just before World War I, which still remains the most, they're always getting into our heads, always looking to get into our heads. The most significant turning point in the history of the world, the behaviorism movement, the idea that humans were just a machine that responded to stimuli, began when the American psychologist John Broadus Watson presented a paper, Psychology as Behaviours Views It. In his highly influential article, Watson stated that the classical condition was able to explain all aspects of human psychology, that there is no mind or consciousness, imagine that, as such, and that all human behaviour from our five sense interaction with this world around us, including our emotions, are exclusively physiological and neurological stimuli and response-based experiences. We are simply organic robots made up of flesh and organs, and there is no ghost in the machine. His famous quote is, "Give me a dozen healthy infants, well-formed, and my own specific world to bring them up in, and I'll guarantee I'll make any one of them at random and train him to become any type of specialist I might select. Doctor, lawyer, artist, merchant chief, and yes, even a beggar man or thief, regardless of his talents, perchance, tendencies, abilities, vocations, and the race of his ancestors." Now that's completely wrong. You cannot program a human being to be anything you want. This also came out of Jesuitical ideas. But the idea was that a human being was a blank canvas that you could mold in any way. That may work for some human beings, but for most it won't, because we're not just robots. We have a soul, we have a consciousness. We cannot just be programmed. You know, the Great World War, the Great War of 1914-18, the First World War, the real cause of that was the Federal Reserve. The Federal Reserve that was created in December 23rd, 1913, led to massive unemployment in Europe. And what did they want? How do you deal with an overpopulation of a biological species? You cull them. And that's what World War I was about. They were culling human beings because there would have been huge economic problems in Europe as the power base moved from Europe to North America after the creation of the Federal Reserve. This shows we're dealing with psychopaths. They saw the culling of Europeans, working class, as no different than the culling of seagulls, the culling of bears, badgers. They'll never stop. And then the Soviet Union, that was a similar thing. That's why the Soviet Union was financed by Wall Street bankers. And then, this is what I said at the beginning, there's so many that are obsessed with you breeding and genetics, and this is why they're obsessed with that whole thing is in the genes. And you look at their history, this is an actual ad for eugenics from the 1930s. America invented what the Nazis perfected. In fact, the Nazis actually believed the Americans went further. The idea that human beings were not fit, that certain human beings were not fit because of their family background or their bloodline, and they would castrate them, sterilize them, cut their ovaries out, abort them, because they wanted that pure master race, purity. It's a psychopath thing, because a psychopath's a pure predator. And so they created all this nonsense, this garbage came out of Sir Francis Galton, who was a half-cousin of Charles Darwin, created the terms eugenics or better breeding. These were all aristocrats. They thought breeding a human being was like breeding a racehorse. They just didn't see that the person had a soul or an individuality or a consciousness. And again, I know this is going into big areas, but can you see the thread of the psychopath running through history, through all this? That's why this is the issue. This is the idea of trash magic. It's an idea that I came up with. But the idea is that they actually use political speech and spin to actually spellbind us with words and play these things. They're not really good musicians, just clever wordsmiths. One of the traits that a psychopath has is word salad. He uses too many words to say something simple and it bewilders you. Donald Rumsfeld, there are known knowns, known unknowns, and unknown knowns. What happens then is your brain shuts off and you don't want to listen to it anymore. And then he can go on to do all the evil he wants. And again, what's the real meaning of magic? The idea of cultivating the sociological autonomia, this obsession with movie magic, industry, entertainment, the buying personas. And this is a quick one. Where do logos come from? These are called phosphenes. This is called what's called the prisoner cinema. I talk about that in the new book as well. Where these are neurological form constants that are created by the human brain without light. You'll see them in the dark after a while. The earliest Paleolithic cave art is usually these shapes. And here's the logos of all our companies and all our countries. There's the 5-pointed star. This is what shows up in your brain. These are actually drawings done by researchers of people who had the lights cut off and they would stimulate their brains and these shapes would appear The spiral, there's the all-seeing eye there, there's the triangle, the target, all the logos, everything that's in there. That's why logos are all the same. They're not Illuminati logos. These people are very clever. They know exactly what shapes go right to the core of our personality and brainwash us. It's not spooky, it's just business. Oh, the 1960s was an interesting one too, as well. As religion collapsed, they gave us flying saucer cults for people to worship in, so they didn't actually have any faith in themselves. They would actually look to the star gods to come and rescue them. And that was all created by the CIA. All the thing of the obsession with flying saucers and UFOs, that's all CIA, and how they used Hollywood to brainwash people that salvation was coming from the stars. That's what Star Trek and all that stuff is about. And then there, you know, this thing, gaslighting. I didn't talk about this, but gaslighting is changing your version of reality, your understanding of reality. So you actually accept new normals, and that's why they give us this stuff here as art, because they want us to believe it's art, because they know human beings will say, "Oh, that's you know, blank canvas. That's a genius work of art." They're afraid that someone will stand up and say, "No, it isn't." You know, like the Emperor's New Clothes kind of thing, because they know how to play in our insecurities. And then they get us to accept. This is where austerity comes from. They've trained us to accept austerity because they've trained us to believe that art is this rubbish here. And then how do you protect yourself from all this? You build a firewall around your consciousness. You learn how to be an adult. You learn how to be mature. You do not react to things. You do not get your truth from a 5-minute or 10-minute YouTube video. You research, you sit back, you think. You always look and you question everything. And creativity is a huge part of this. If you have a creative aspect, it's a great way of dealing and escaping a psychopathic issue. If someone's bothering you. Psychopaths are terrible at creativity. And you'll actually build your own neuroplasticity. So your neuroplasticity is actually built by yourself. That's why every thought has a neurological cause and effect. If a psychopath gets into your mind, he'll wreck it. You'll wreck it because he's actually rewiring your neurology. Be very careful of what you let in there. And then we must actually engage with the shadow of the human race. We have psychopaths we have to deal with. And like I said, there's two kinds of people in this world. There's ones who share your energy and those who take your energy. And your own intuition. Your intuition plays a huge part in this. Anyone who ever knew a psychopath always tells you, when I first met him, it just gave me the creeps. There was something not right there, but I let it go. It's really that easy, you know. And being awake is only worth doing it if you're going to make use of it by creating and building tangible results. So it's no use running down the street going, you know, listen to a sort of an Alex Jones approach, like, "Oh, it's the end of the world, they're all going to kill us." That's not going to solve anything. You've got to find a way for you to get you as an individual out of that, and I start working on solutions, plant a garden, learn about law, have meetings like this. I can't stress how important these meetings are, because these are the right minds getting together. And that's it. My website, I'm sorry I have to rush through this, but I really need another presentation to actually go further. But I have a film coming out called The End of an Era soon, and it's about how I'm going to show how all this was done to destroy my country, Ireland, through the Lisbon Treaty, through the IMF, and that'll be free online, so look out for that. My website is thomassheridanarts.com, and thanks very much for having me here and allowing me to share this information with you, and you've been very kind and everything, so thank you very much. I don't want to keep anyone, but if anyone has questions, I can answer them. You have to run off, or if you're tired. So, anyone got any questions? I've blown your minds. You see, when I look at the things, really, I have to sort of have like really good proof of it. The chemtrails thing, yeah, okay. The trails are not the same as when we were kids. There's something different there. But I haven't seen any proof that they're actually poisoning us. I'll tell you why, because they'd have to have massive factories developing this stuff. But there's something going on. What it is, I don't know. And I'm not going to sit here and say, "Oh, it's this, that, and the other." The HARP thing, that thing really does exist. HARP is an actual machine. That's not a conspiracy theory. It does wreck the upper, it does mess up with the upper atmosphere. It is known to cause earthquakes. It's probably some kind of weapon system. I wouldn't put anything past them. But again, you're asking someone who hasn't really looked into it, so I'm not really. But put it this way, I wouldn't put anything past them.
Yeah, thanks. You say that you're a psychopath. Is it hereditary, or can you just develop it as psychopathic tendencies?
It's neither. I've seen no proof it's hereditary.
It came from like Babylon.
We don't know. It just seems to arrive in some people.
You have a child and you're going to have psychopathic.
Yeah, it just happens. It's like, the way you have a savant in a family where you might have a kid who's an amazing piano player and no one else in the family can, sing a note. Or a family where they're all like not healthy and the one kid's an amazing footballer, or rugby player, or athlete. It just seems to happen like that. It's just this kid just arrives who's not like the rest of the family. But the parents wouldn't be like that, the grandparents wouldn't be like that, so that would be hereditary.
So does the environment now mold?
That would create the proper psychopaths, people who are damaged, but you can fix them. A real psychopath, and they're... Yeah. Look, there's all kinds of damaged people in the world and they can be fixed. But a true psychopath could grow up with all the privileges in the world in a very well-to-do home, never have to struggle for anything, and he'll still be a criminal. But also, on his deathbed, every psychopath is purely predatory right to the end. In the old people's home, they'll be stealing stuff from the other patients and stuff.
Thomas, do you think there's a psychopathic thought behind the origination of the Liverpool pathway for the exit of old people?
I don't even know what that is.
It's sedation, dehydration of old people.
Oh yeah, that's going on in Ireland. They have a different name for it. That's just the health boards trying to cut costs.
Right.
Because they don't see human beings as souls, and they don't see them as love. They've never recognised that their nephew would really miss them, or their partner would be crying. Yeah, it's just business. That's always the term. When I talk about psychopaths, I always say, the way to understand them, it's just business. Sorry? I've written Puzzling People, Elaborate to the Psychopath, Defeat the Demons, Freedom from Conscious Parasite Society, Reject and Survive the Psychopathic Control Grid, which is a script from a movie I was working on. It never got made, plus the bits that didn't make those two books, and The Animal of the Psyche, the new one, which deals with media and manipulation, when I was talking about how they play with our minds through pop culture. That's mainly what that deals with. So 4 books so far. I've written other books, but they're relevant to this.
Thomas, I know you're a bit reticent about pointing at genetics with this, and there's no evidence, or you say there's no evidence, but
no hard evidence.
Well, by their own actions, you're saying they're obsessed with blood, which they are. They don't breed out. Perhaps the aberrations that do pop up, that we come face to face with, are the fact that they've bred out.
Yeah, I thought about this a lot as well, but they are obsessed with breeding amongst themselves, but they're not always psychopathic in these families. Not every evil. But I think a lot of that is learned behaviour. When I was 19, I fancied this girl, but she was big into fox hunting, and so she got me into it as well. And I started to be disgusted by the fox hunting thing. And we were somewhere in Ireland, and they had this kind of rich family, and they were featured the top scout, showing a red coat, that crap. And I saw the fox running in the distance, and the thing was terrified, the hounds after it. And then they got the fox, right? And to this day, I will never forget the screams of that fox being torn apart by the hounds. It was like the gates of hell being open, right? And then later on, I saw the young kids on the hut, blood here, here, and here. And I asked the girl what that was, and they said it's called blooding. It's called blooding, and the child on the first day of the fox hunt is blooded with and then I thought about that later on. When an animal is dying, it releases vast amounts of adrenaline. A child's facial tissue is very thin. That's what medications are sometimes given to kids, for creams on the faces. So if you're wiping this moment of demonic murder onto a young child's face, what is being absorbed into that child? they all seem to be obsessed with hunting and nastiness. So even if the kids are not psychopathic, they're raised in a psychopathic situation, and they're always told that other kids are lower than them if they're not from their families. You look at, and then there's also sex plays a big thing when they all lose their virginities in the locker rooms of Harrow and Eton. You know, they're raped by the older boys. There's a lot. They're treated quite cruelly for their privilege. There's a lot of sort of rape goes on in these privileged schools. So they're made into monsters even if they're not. So it's almost like a dog. It's a very sort of exclusive way of whipping a dog to make it vicious.
To keep it going from ancient Babylon through to the modern day New World Order, it's a phenomenal organising. It wasn't genetic.
Oh, they're brilliant at that. They're fantastic at organising. But you look at anyone who gets in their way, what they do to them. Look at the purges of royal families. Look how the Romans were killing each other in the families. Yeah, it could be hereditary. I'm just saying I haven't seen a hard proof. I'll tell you one thing: they actually do have a psychopathic culture, and that's definitely passed on.
I was interested to talk about architects coming through. I've kind of had something in my head for a while, and I don't know what you think about it, but if you remember, there's a lot about archetypal images, well, a couple of archetypal images there, the tower, and from the tower up, and the falling man, if you remember my image of the falling man, I know he must have tumbled right, but there is the iconic shot is of this guy, and he's just in the position of the hanged man. And I think that sort of came through from the collective unconscious.
Oh, of course it did. I'm a big, yeah.
It's about surrender to the higher good, not control and evil. It's the hangman's about surrendering for the good. Not control circumstances. The tower's about destruction through
Natural forces.
Yes.
Yeah.
And the hanged man is about the need to give in to love, to let the higher will guide you. And I thought, wow, that is amazing that on such a day that changed history, those two iconic archetypes were, well, for me, they were in my face. I haven't been able to get over that.
Oh yes, I'm a big proponent of the tarot. I don't use it for divination, but I'm a big believer but I'm not against that. It's just that I don't, and I do know quite a lot about it and the symbolism. The hanged man is a reversal of values, and I think what happened on 9/11 is what the reason why we're here. Forget the causes, whatever that is. We knew right there and then that the world, we suffered a collective psychic shock, and that was the hanged man, the reversal of fortunes. And you see, that's why we had a calling, and the world is not right. And the tarot. I found it incredibly spooky as well. But it's like I was doing a tarot reading for a friend today, and the Fool came up on the top deck, and it's like that's what we kind of are now. It's the infant ego in bloom, and the Fool and the top deck has no eyelids, and it's almost like he's had his eyelids ripped off, and what he sees he cannot unsee. And that's where we are right now. But we now have to move to those progressions in order to evolve, to deal with this properly, not running down the street with a megaphone, terrorizing people. If anyone wants to come to Heaven Bridge tomorrow night, I'm doing a talk called Waking Up is Hard to Do. It's going about, I've been doing these talks around Europe for a while. I've seen the mistakes that people make with waking up, and they alienate their friends. I've known relationships that have broken up. So if you want to come and talk about that, but there's a way of waking up without destroying your social life. And that's why I'm not suspicious of people like Alan Jones, but it doesn't help. Running down the street with a megaphone is not going to win you any friends, because we're dealing with people. You can't go up to someone that's worked all their life, put all their effort into something, and say, you're wrong. And you're wrong because you're a sheep. That's not, we do not treat people like that. We have to be respectful. So if anyone wants to come to Heaven Bridge tomorrow night, I'll be there. But yeah, great observation about tarot cards.
You must have this skill as well. People follow psychopaths. Actually, it works for them because all the leaders in history, right back to Yahweh,
Yes.
psychopath, people worship them.
Oh yeah, well they will worship them, they worship the perception they create. They're great phonies, they're the greatest phonies. Because they fill in all the gaps that we need. What we want from them, they'll give us. But it's you know what it is? It's a lure. It's like the fish. It's like the trout in the river. And you make the lure. It looks like a fly, but it's a hook in it. That's how they do it. Oh yeah, they're so powerful. But they've had thousands of years to do it. Thank you, everybody.
Thanks, Thomas.